Hi, I'm Rachel. Welcome to Life on Purpose. I invite you to join in on this journey to live a life of deep meaning and intention. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Life on Purpose. Thank you for joining me today, and I am thrilled to be having this conversation. I know I say that every time, but it's just because it's the truth. I'm so excited to have this conversation with Shay Wanner. And I think something that I just am especially curious about is because she comes from a life that I know like basically nothing about except that I've watched Heartland. So I feel like I feel like I've watched a TV show that's maybe connected with her actual life. So I'm really excited to have this conversation because it just gives me glimpses into other people's lives and how they live in a life that I would never experience. So let me introduce you to Shay, and I'm excited to get into our conversation here today. Shay Wanner has a podcast with over 200,000 downloads, which she monetized within the first 6 months of launching and now serves as a consistent income source. That's amazing. And I saw on your website that you offer tips for podcasters. So I'm so excited. I'm really excited to look more into those. Shay's talent and passion for asking questions that create an impact have allowed her to inspire over 11,000 podcast listeners and help 60 ranches become more profitable through her rancher mind events.
Yeah, they're masterminds for ranchers. That's how I coined the name for it.
I love that. Rancher Mind events. I saw online that you have Q&A times and wonderful resources. That is so fantastic. When Shay isn't behind the mic, she is farming and ranching alongside her husband and carrying on the agriculture legacy that that runs 5 generations deep. Now, let me ask you real quick before we get it. Is this so 5 generations on your side of the family, your husband's family? Like, are you both?
Yep. So right now, my husband and I got married last October, so it hasn't even been a year yet because we're recording in the middle of May. And so his family's farm, which we now live on, he's for sure, I'm pretty sure he's the 5th. I have to double check with him. But then I am also, my family's ranch is only 45 minutes away. And so, yes, I am for sure the 5th, and we might suspect even the 6th generation to be in the agriculture industry. Not necessarily all on the same operation, but both my parents go back a lot of generations. So just continuing that on.
Wow. Well, congrats on your wedding.
Thank you.
That's wonderful news and very exciting. So your podcast is very specific to cattle production. And again, that's something I know nothing about. And so it's so intriguing. So please tell me why you are so passionate about bringing these conversations to light and supporting other cattle producers.
Well, I think that goes back to what we just talked about, where I'm this 5th generation, right? And with that, the ranching lifestyle, the agriculture lifestyle, taking care of the land, taking care of the livestock, it's a livelihood, but it's also a business. And I would not be able to be the 5th generation if my ancestors, my family members weren't also innovators and businesswomen and men, where we were able to carry this legacy on, right? And so in that, some of my earliest memories from when I was 2 or 3 years old are on the ranch with my parents. It's being horseback, it's gathering cattle, it's being kind of by the chutes with them, not right up next to them, but, just watching everything going on. Maybe my grandma was holding my hand or with my grandpa, something like that. Those are some of my earliest memories. And so it's really just a way of life that's been ingrained in me. And as I got older, my parents gave me the opportunity to have my own cattle and get a taste of that and start making a few small decisions and see what it was like. And it's something that I just inherently, like my other family members, grew to love. And it's a challenge, and I love a challenge. So I think there's always that component with it too. But when I was in college, I was looking at, everyone, the golden question, what do you want to do when you grow up? Nothing ever seemed to fit. And it was so frustrating all through high school and even early in college. And I was in this entrepreneurship program at my school, and I was like, I'm passionate about ranching. I'm passionate about communication. I'm passionate about education. And I was just spinning my wheels. I couldn't figure out where to start. I had all this energy and curiosity and passion. So then one of my professors was like, maybe look into some of these options that you can just start now. You can start for free. And so we got into podcasting. So it was really just a way for me to apply my energy and passion, explore, be curious. I've always had more questions than anyone could answer, it seems like. So it was really just a great opportunity for me to get started and network and then eventually start earning money off of it as well. So that's really where it got started. And I chose to be so niche down because that's what I'm interested in. But also it was advised to me. And that's something I advised other podcasters I help too is niche down, get really specific because you're going to produce so much more valuable content and build up so much more of a loyal audience. But yeah, that's kind of the why for how I got started.
Wow. That is so great. Thanks for sharing that, Shay. Did you so when you first started in recording, were you specifically talking about ranching or were you talking about other topics?
It was very much specifically about ranching.
Okay.
But with ranching, you look at it, ranching itself is so broad because you're looking at how are we managing natural resources, which can look like the soil, the grass, the water, what other feed, cropland, farming, that all kind of ties in together. And then you also look at animals, and it can be animal health or genetics or nutrition. And then you have the business side of it, which can be, there's so many different areas to talk about within there. And there's the leadership side and mental health and physical health. So there's so much that can be tied in there. There's never a shortage of topics, even though I'm so niche down.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. So you obviously there's a need for these conversations because you have so many listeners and people wanting this material
Mhm.
and this almost community that you're creating. What do you see are some of those lifestyle needs that maybe aren't met sometimes? Um, so what I'm thinking is like, why would someone who's in cattle production, what are they lacking where they would like seek out some community and
Mhm.
seek out those conversations that are helping them? Because I would kind of think like, oh, we just do things the way our family did them. But do you see some needs that are really, being met by your work?
Yeah. So actually, that's what a lot of people call a paradigm shift, or where the most dangerous words that can ever be said in, I think, any business, but specifically agriculture is, well, that's just the way we've always done things.
Mm.
Because, that's how grandpa did it. So that's how dad learned. So then that's how dad taught me. Well, and not on everything. Like I feel like I have very innovative family members, but it's something where it is really important, even when you're back on a family operation, to continuously be looking at what new methods are out there. I mean, when my grandpa started, he didn't have the option to take a DNA sample out of an animal to predict how that animal would perform and what types of calves that heifer might produce when she's old enough. My husband and I have that opportunity, and so it's just a completely different world with technology and what we know and the research that's now available. So that's part of it, is that's really a message that's being shared and people are taking hold of. The other side of it, you already touched on, you said community. Well, ranchers, there are quite a few, local or even nationwide or statewide conferences and community organizations. But because we are tied to taking care of our cattle, and sometimes in the winter, that might mean feeding every day, we can't necessarily leave for long extended periods of time unless we know someone else is going to be taking care of the livestock, making sure everything's handled. So to be able to have an online community, while it never replaces that in-person connection, it's easier for people to join. And that was really where Rancher Minds also stemmed from, because it was, I have people joining from the hayfield or the calving barn or from their kids' basketball games on their way home or wherever they may be. With Zoom, they're able just to join. So it really also creates that community for people who are in rural settings. I mean, it can be lonely in a rural community. I mean, I grew up in a town with 1,000 or less people. I live in another town about that size. It's just how it is. And there's not a lot of people, so things can be lonely.
Wow. What an amazing offering that you are able to use this technology. And isn't it great how we can connect and learn from other people and learn from these new technologies that we have? It's just incredible.
Well, and we can learn something from everyone,
Mhm.
whether you agree with them or don't or if whether you agree or disagree with them. We learn something from every interaction we have with someone if we really reflect on it.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm curious, what have been some things that you have learned as you have been interviewing guests for your podcast?
The biggest thing, which I think is really hard to remember at my point in life, just being a very young, ambitious person, but it's something we all need to remember, is that we are constantly learning. We never know it all. And I mean, that's what's so fun is I might have someone I'm interviewing who's maybe in their 50s, 60s, or 70s, but they'll openly admit that, I screwed up at all these points during my life. They'll openly admit that it took failures to get to where they are today and they learn from those. But even with where they're at today, they'll talk about, learning, or how they're still learning a certain topic or subject, or researching, or maybe I'll even ask a question and they'll say, well, that's not my area of expertise, So it's just, I think, really refreshing to have these conversations with people that I look up to, and people who are really well established and have been successful, and know that they, like me, are learning every day.
Oh, that's great. So some people may see from the outside your situation of having these generations that kind of this was the thing. And were you ever concerned about that? Like, not like, oh, am I just doing this because it's my family thing? Or really feeling like this was meant for you? Because some people could look in it from the outside and say like, "Well, that's just what your family does, so you don't know any, like you haven't had experiences to know if there's other things that you want." But how did you know, like in your authentic self, that this was what you wanted to do and follow?
Yeah, so ultimately, as I was in 4-H and FFA in high school and student council, I was exposed to other leadership opportunities, and that allowed me to, explore different routes through communications, which is really where I kind of found that passion and was able to tie that back. But then, even as I got to college, so I'm from North Dakota, and that's where I live today, but I went to college in Nebraska. So from where I was at in college to the ranch at home, that was 600 miles. And so I didn't go home very often. And it was something that ultimately, no matter how much something else interested me, it couldn't hold my attention very long, because I always wanted to go back to the ranch. Or anytime I was doing something else, I was like, well, how can I apply this to what we're doing on the ranch? And, I even tried to picture, there was a time where I wasn't sure if I would come back, if I'm being honest. I wasn't sure, kind of those first couple of years of college. I knew I wanted to be a part of the agriculture industry, but I was like, well, does that mean, maybe I'm working abroad or traveling or doing something else in a different supporting sector? But I always kept going back to the ranch. And I think that's the importance of internships too. And finding out too, in those internships, they taught me what I don't like.
Yeah.
I think that's really what narrowed it down. And there are hard days. It's just like anything, right? I think, but it's important to, when we have those hard moments and even those triumphs, to just question why and really dig into it, because ultimately I do think we know what we want more than we give ourselves credit for. And a lot of times we for sure know what we don't want, even if we can't come up with the words for what we do want.
Wow. What do you love the most about being involved on the ranch?
I am so connected to life. Just 2 days ago, I got to watch a baby calf be born from start to finish, and that it was out of a heifer, so it's the first time she's ever given birth,
Okay.
and she just knew exactly what to do. And so it's just that instinct. And then yesterday, we got to turn some cattle out to a new pasture, and it was being able to watch the grass grow and know that that soil is living, that grass is living, and there's gophers and rabbits and coyotes and insects and birds, and there's all these different forms of life coexisting and helping each other thrive. And so there's just life everywhere.
And that inspires you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I think that would be I don't think that's something that people would think about as an outsider looking in. I think we would see like, yeah, the hard work and dependent on weather and dependent on so many things. And I really appreciate how you are seeing the miracle of it.
And a lot of it goes back to faith too. I
Mm,
mean, because we are so dependent on the weather. If we don't have grass, our crops, or I'm sorry, if we don't have rain, our grass doesn't grow, our crops don't grow. If we don't have sunshine, that impacts that. Um, Even though like winter can be really tough and we say we don't want a lot of snow, that's still moisture too. So even though we had this most beautiful, sunny, and a mostly open winter up here, we were all like, yeah, we need a little moisture too, which we were very much blessed with this past few weeks to make up for that. But it's, it all goes, yeah, it's all tied hand in
mhm.
hand that, you have to have faith to make sure, because you can't guarantee what the weather's going to do. But there is a lot of value in that hard work and knowing that it might not be this year, but maybe next year it'll pay off. It might be 10 years, but it's it's rewarding. It's good for the soul. And yeah.
Oh, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about how other people can find their purpose.
Mhm.
And one thing that you talk about is going back to what you're good at and what you were interested in as a child. So what do you think is important about like that childhood interest?
Well, when you watch like little kids play, they're not, and what they're interested in, they're not worried about what other people think. It's very much they let their curiosity lead the way in a lot of ways. And um, I think, that's something that I realized a few years ago, when I was thinking about, I was really questioning, is podcasting what I want to pursue once I graduate from college? Because it can be a challenge as well. And I was thinking about it and I was like, is this really what I'm good at? Is this really what I'm talented at? And I went back to thinking about, what was I good at as a little kid? And I was home over the summer and I was cleaning out my old room and I came across this old journal from when I was probably like 4. So it had all these, scribbles and whatnot in it. But there was a story in there. And I remember doing this. I woke up in the middle of the night and my mom was working on her own business. And I had the story. And so she wrote down this story for me. So storytelling was always innately something that I was good at or I like to do in a sense. And then it sparked, I was like, well, I remember making up songs and other stories and all these other things and asking lots of questions. And, even in high school, whenever we'd be on field trips or tours or anything like that, I always had to joke the tour guides. I was always the one they didn't like because I asked questions I didn't have the answers to. So I think it's just important to go back to that and know that that inner childlike spirit is still alive inside you and to give that place to grow.
I think one of the challenges that I think people could come up against when they're really trying to embrace what they enjoyed as a child is judgment around that. Have you ever felt that those, like what you talked about, those limiting paradigms of judgment, of, oh, you know, maybe I'm going to keep this side of me more muted because maybe I should be a certain way. Have you ever felt that?
Every day.
Okay,
Every
tell
day.
me about that.
I mean, I always when we talk about resistance in life or fears in life, one of my biggest fears is always what other people think.
Mm.
That's always what it goes back to. Anytime I'm launching a new podcasting program, or even there's a little part of me with every episode, it's like, are people actually going to like this? Or even, on the hobby side, I like to paint. They're nothing spectacular, nothing amazing, but it's good for my soul. I've always liked to paint and color, so why not do it if it is good for me? And it's just, I think you just have to do it and allow yourself to be free and I think what inspires me to do that is seeing other people who do that. So if we all just stayed true to ourselves a little more, maybe it'd be better for everyone.
So when you have those thoughts and feelings come up, how do you remind yourself to stay true to who you are?
It can look a little different depending on the day. Obviously, we all go through different seasons where it might be harder to pull ourselves out than it is, some days. But I think it really goes back to, this is about living life on purpose. And for me, my definition of purpose and living life on purpose is using my God given talents each and every day. And so if I'm shoving those aside to do what I think will please other people or fit into society, I'm not doing a service to myself. And more importantly, as a believer, I'm not doing service to God. So that's ultimately what it comes back to for me.
Beautiful. How have you had to trust yourself in your process? I wanted to talk to you about like where have you had to trust your gut on your decisions and on your path?
Oh gosh. I think um so one that comes to mind. So when I graduated college a few years ago, I was not consistently making income off my podcast. I mean, it was a few ads here or there. I was monetized, but it was pretty sporadic. Not much I could rely on. It was, doing a little more than breaking even, which was nice, but definitely not something I could go home and live on. And so it was like, okay, so I knew I needed to find something part time so that way I could still build up my own business. And so I feel like, I trusted myself to do that there, even though there was a little pushback there. And I still think it was the right decision. But so that would have been in May. And by October, I resigned and I said, I'm just going to podcast and ranch because I was working part time on the family ranch and I had my podcast. And it was really hard because I had an offer to come on as a full-time employee of the company, have a lot of say in the communications and marketing of this startup. They had been very good to me. I loved my boss, and I don't like working for anyone, but I loved my boss. And it was really, really tempting. But deep down, I knew it was going to be the same cycle, just like every other internship or part-time job I had, and that it's really exciting for a little while, and then it's just frustrating because I'm not doing exactly what I want to do. And so I really had to trust myself to take that on and make that decision, make that leap, even when I was still financially, it was a jump. But some advice that a fellow entrepreneur and friend gave me was, and she's a few years older than me, so she's already lived through this similar experience. And it was, the finances will figure itself out once you fully commit to that. And she was so right. And it wasn't exactly how I thought they would figure themselves out, but they did. And so I think it was really just, like you said, an instance of having to trust your gut and trust that intuition and yourself, because ultimately comes back to, I was like, well, what's the worst that can happen? It doesn't work out, and then I just have to get another job. That's not bad. There's nothing wrong with that. I'd rather live with that than the fear of not knowing what could have been.
It's interesting because either way, you were going to be uncomfortable. You were gonna
Yeah.
be uncomfortable if you stayed in the job and weren't living fully in what your passion was. And so there was discomfort staying in that place, but there was also discomfort facing that and really saying, expressing like, "This is a decision I'm making." And it kind of goes back to that fear of, these people have been so nice to me. What are they gonna think? Are they gonna feel like I'm not appreciative? Or what were you thinking in that? What was the discomfort in there?
Well, so this company I was working for, I had interned with them while I was still in college. And at this point, I had the podcast. And so they knew when my summer internship was technically over, they said, this doesn't have to be over. Like, if you want to be part time with us for the rest of your senior year, you're more than welcome. And I was like, I have too much going on right now. Like, I'm not going to be able to do it. And then, you know, they took me on right away, basically as soon as I expressed interest. Again, so I felt, very loyal to them. But when I signed on and had my meeting with my boss, I was like, just so you know, like, my ultimate goal is still to be full time with my own podcast someday, or not just the podcast, but full time ranching and podcast someday. That is like my goal right now. And she said, I know, and we're here to support you in that. And so it really helped that she was supportive in that. And I had said that right off the bat, because I think that lifted a lot of weight that could have been there, and almost a sense of guilt that could have been created. And so I guess that was kind of the biggest thing. And, I resigned in early October, but I told, it wasn't like a 2 week resignation. I said, I'll stick on for a month. This date in November will be my last date. I will help, train the next person. I will get things set up, so that it's more of a streamlined process. And so that was kind of what I did to make up that difference there. But during that process for months, my now husband, but we were still just dating at the time, he would ask me, once every other week or so, when I'd say I was going to have a meeting with my boss, he was like, are you going to resign this time?
Oh, dear.
And it's not that I didn't like what I was doing, but he
Yeah.
knew, like, I was already experiencing some frustrations of not having enough time for my podcast. And he was like, well, when are you going to tell her you want to do this? And I was like, well, I'd always just say, well, I don't know if it's right yet. I don't know yet. I don't know yet. And my mom and dad would ask me the same question. And I was like, eventually, and I think my timing was right with it. It was right to trust when I did finally say I'm done. Because I did, my grandpa ended up needing a lot more help on the ranch that winter. And so it worked out, because my last day was when he had a little bit of an accident and needed a little more help with his stuff. So I was able to step in and do that and have the time and be able to make that commitment.
Oh, that's so good. It sounds like it was yeah, it was laid out in a way that you were prepared, you were ready, and then you could feel good about taking that step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And what after you took that step of feeling like, "Okay, I know in my gut that I need to make a change," and really commit, not kind of dabble where I'm, like, still having that safety, because that was really a safety net of still having that, accessible
Well, that's
income.
exactly what it was.
Yeah. So what did you find after you made that leap as far as your opportunity to grow and focus on what you wanted to?
It was something where I was really intentional about it, but um almost sometimes tried to be forceful because I was so concerned about things. And after a few months, and once I finally relaxed and realized, I would be able to float through and shift and make up the difference. And I still picked up a few off end freelance jobs to figure things out, right? I still do occasionally,
Yeah.
and it's fun. I like it.
Yeah.
But you can't force it either. And I think that's a really hard balance that I still work on too, because I'm so much of a planner, right? Like this is exactly how it's going to go if it were, my plan in my world, but it's not. And so it really came down to being intentional with here are my goals. And I had been through some coaching programs to help set me up. Like in September, so about a month before I had resigned, I was at a coaching program and I had expressed like, I want to, be on my own within a year. I didn't think it'd be a month. But, and they had helped me like establish goals. So I think that's important too, is like finding that mentorship or someone to help you get you on the right track. So I knew where I wanted to go and I knew some steps that it would take to kind of get me there. And so I think that's really important when you do make that leap or anytime you make a change is to be intentional, have some of those steps, but also know that if it's feeling forced, it's maybe not right. There's a difference. I don't know how to describe it other than my mom always said, trust your gut. And so that's what I've always done.
How do you see the ranchers and the cattle producers that you work with? How do you see them leaning into some of that discomfort and some of that trusting?
Oh, ranching's uncomfortable every day. There's so much going on. I mean, um, and I think any business owner knows that. I don't want to exclude that just to ranching, but really, when I look at my rancher mind community, it's fun because I'm bringing in experts and helping facilitate these calls, and most of them are around my parents' age or older or a little younger. I occasionally I have someone jump in who's in their mid 20s like me. Um, but it's fun because they openly admit to having questions and leaning into these almost gray areas where they want answers and are trying to find the solutions. So it goes back to what we talked about a little earlier in our conversation, where we're all just continuously learning and leaning into those moments. That's something a mentor would always tell me when I was going through a tough season was just lean into it and find a way to embrace it. And that's when you'll find these solutions or those aha moments will eventually come to you. But you can't disregard it. Like if there's a gray area or something you're confused about or a problem, give it some grace, allow it some space. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I appreciate that. Now, is your husband as interested in, being in front of the microphone as you, or does he prefer, like, to just stay on the ranching side of things?
So he actually does more farming than ranching.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and he does some crop consulting work where he has some clients where he helps them plan out their crop rotations and any fertilizing and planting and anything like that. There's a lot of precision and technology that goes with that. So him and his dad have that business, and then we do our farming, and then now that I'm here, I do a lot of the cattle stuff, which they appreciate because they are really more passionate about growing crops. But he's on different leadership boards and whatnot, more on the in-person side of it, not so much on the mic as much as I am. But yeah, very
Okay.
involved and active in his own interest areas.
Wow. That's just so fascinating. Just amazing. And it's so lovely to hear how you've each brought your own pieces to this relationship but it's still connected.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally connected.
100%. Yeah, very connected. And like it's not like he's just the crops and I'm just the cattle. I mean, we go back and forth on it. It's just that's what we're more interested in. So if there's a change that needs to be done on the cattle side, I'm the one doing the research and reaching out to experts and lining stuff up. And he does more on the crop side. And, like I said before we were visiting on this call, I was out helping him late last night and during calving. It's definitely a team effort. And his parents are still involved on the operation today too. So there's four of us, and brother-in-law is a hired man. So
Mm.
we, yeah, it's all a team effort.
And there are probably these busier times for the different projects, right? You're
Yep.
having the busy time during this season for the farming, and then it's this for the capping or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. How do you, because you are a planner, I feel yeah, I'm a planner too. And how do you keep that kind of flow going when you are a planner and things happen on farms and ranches where you just kind of have to stop everything and that has to be the priority at the moment? How do you find that flow for yourself?
It's really funny you bring that up because on my desk I have this sticky note that says flow as my word for 2024.
Oh, yeah, I'm with you.
um, just because maybe that's something I need to work on. You know, it's really, so I'm going to take this back to when we started calving. So we started calving about the middle of March. Right away, it was a little bit of an adjustment, right? Our sleep schedules were off because it was a little colder. So we were out checking cattle every 2 to 3 hours, depending on how cold it was at night. So, we'd have different shifts or blocks where my husband would take, anything from like 10 to 2, and I would take anything after 2 up till 7. But then sometimes, like, if something was having trouble or he needed help, we would both be up all night trying to make sure everything was calving out fine. So you just go through that adjustment and you figure out what works and you create your own routine and grant each other grace. And then you get your flow, you get your routine, you figure out, who's good at what can they handle, and you go from there. Same thing as we've started planting. It's like, well, we still have a few cows that are calving. So that's what I take care of. When I need help, I ask, but otherwise, I take care of it. And the guys are out in the field. And so, yeah, it's a lot of granting yourself grace and being honest with who's good at what and where do we need help and what do we need to focus on.
Hmm. We have here in Ohio a very big like agricultural conference every year. Um, OSU is so, like
Mhm.
so such an amazing resource for the farmers and those in agriculture out here. It's just so amazing that there are so many resources available. One thing I think that gets kind of looked over sometimes, and I'm so glad that at this conference they try to bring it up, is the mental health piece of it.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you touch on this on your podcast, but you
I
spoke of
do.
it a little bit earlier. Um, why do you think that like the rancher farmer community is almost a little like more hesitant to talk about that than other types of communities? Or do you find that that people are open and welcome to that?
I don't like placing an idea of how people act on like a broad group of people because there are a lot of farmers and ranchers out there, and it very much depends on how you were brought up, how your family handles hard times. And there's a lot of factors that go into it, your own personal experiences, etc. I will say that I I do think it is more of a challenge to talk about in agriculture sometimes because a lot of the narrative is, you know, we live a challenging lifestyle. There is a lot of hard work. We do depend on the weather. There are a lot of risks that go into it, but we tough it up. Just tough it up. Keep going. And I think that's, something that people are trying to change. And I think it's important that we change that too. But yeah, so I do think it is more of a challenge in agriculture, and it does come from a lot of how we were raised and expected to not talk about some things, and not bring it up, even though it is really important. But I do see that change. I do see a lot more resources coming out, a lot more conversations that are being had. I know I personally hosted it was a free webinar. Her name was Ashley Mikado. She's out of California, but she specifically talks about mental health and agriculture. And so we did a free webinar about beating the winter blues and really actionable items to, you know, kind of thrive through winter, even though it can be cold and darker and all those things that maybe we don't like as much as summer. So, I had an event like that where I had quite a few people join and just gain some tips and again, build some community around it. Um, and through anonymous answers, be able to say, yeah, I get depressed in the winter, or maybe I have depression and anxiety all the time. And it's just something that, maybe people weren't aware of how common it was. And I don't know that that's necessarily an agriculture thing, too. I think that's just a generational thing for, my generation and even the millennials. It's something that we realize how much more common it is and are more open to talking about it. And we also have more resources and there's more research about it. I've also done podcast episodes. I did one with Callie Thorne, and she talks about mindset, and she's in agriculture too. And so we talked about, that side of the mental health and reframing thoughts in your mind and how you can use that to get through some of those tough times without pushing out the fact that some things are just hard. That's just how it is.
Yes. And it's probably also my own narratives about that I look at farmers and ranchers and I'm like, wow, that's tough. Yeah, that you are tough people and you just keep going. And there's no time to just sit and not be okay or not do the things because your livelihood depends on that those things happen when they need to happen. And so, yeah, I have that narrative myself of just those are tough people.
Well,
And
it is hard because yeah, we were all pretty sleep deprived during calving, right?
yeah,
But we had to be out there to make sure everything was okay.
yeah,
But in that, I looked at it as, well, yeah, life's tough right now, maybe it wasn't just, was lacking sleep, other things weren't getting attention in my business. There were other things going wrong, but you know, I just got to save a calf's life. That's pretty amazing. Or I just got to see one, like we talked about earlier, a heifer having her very first calf and knowing exactly what to do. I mean, that's it. That's why the life component is just my favorite part about what I get to do every day.
yeah. And that satisfaction, that feeling of satisfaction and that feeling of pride and that the feeling of hard work,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which I think some people lose that sense of like, wow, I did something so hard and worked so hard and was, put in all these hours. How do you allow yourself to really enjoy that satisfaction, like, really just soak it in? Because you have sacrificed and worked hard. How can you balance that with, like, oh, that satisfied feeling?
I really do think you do need to make time to reflect on things, because if you just keep working and moving on to the next thing and the next thing, you end up living in the gap. I don't know if you've ever read The Gap and the Gain, but it's a phenomenal book. I listen to it, a couple times a year. I like the audio version of it. It sounds more like a podcast. But in that book, it talks about when you're living in the gap, it's like, okay, so I set this goal where I want to be here, and then I reach it, but by the time I've reached it, I've already pushed the goal to actually be here. So it never feels like we're reaching the goal. Whereas if you live in the gain, you're looking back, well, how far have I already come? And there's a lot of different stories. So it's, if you look at just, there's a lot of maybe changes my husband and I want to make. But if we look back and say, well, look at how many changes we've already made in a few months that have pushed us forward. Look at how many changes or how much learning we've done and how far we've progressed, even as individuals, even before we were dating or before we were married, and just on our individual pathways. And I think that's a lot of it too, is how you look at it. I mean, and sometimes it's looking at other stories too. I think back, there's a picture of my parents, my sister, and I when we were just little kids, and they were outside of where we were working cattle that day. And I love that picture because at that time, mom and dad were really proud because it was like that was the new cattle working facilities. They were, this young family, they were doing things. We don't even use that facility anymore. It's not even there. We've advanced and have a different facility. And so it's just really cool to look back and see how far my parents have even progressed. And that's how I like to remind myself too. Like, they didn't build what they have in one day, it took time. And so I think it's important to talk to other people and remember that no one got everything they had in one day.
Mm.
So that's part of it. It's a lot of mindset and reflection to just sit back and realize that, hey, I did that.
Okay, 2 things that brought to mind. Number 1, is your sister's journey in cattle as well?
Yeah, so her and her husband ranch about 3 hours from where I'm at. So yeah, she's very involved in that operation as well. So yeah,
Okay.
even more involved than I am on this one. She's absolutely loves it. That's what she's meant to do.
Oh, that's wonderful. And secondly, you talked about looking at the gains, which I am definitely going to look up this book. When I asked the question, I was thinking of the book, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, because he talks about really allowing yourself to feel the good feelings, the pride, the satisfaction. And so when you were talking about looking back in the gains, I wondered, what is something that you have made a change on recently that you feel really proud of?
Oh, so business-wise with the podcast, one of the changes that I made was a couple months ago, I hired a virtual assistant to handle some of the um, design of some social media posts and creating reels for me. And initially, that was really hard for me to let go because I am a creative and I know I'm capable of doing some cool things. I've done cool things in the past, but I was so overloaded with other things that I wasn't getting results because I wasn't putting the right energy forth. And so I handed that off, and it was really hard to let go of that control, but it has been so worth it. And I'm very proud of myself for outsourcing and, even utilizing my editor to do a few more things on podcast episode and whatnot, because it's just, it allows me to live a fuller life. It allows me to serve my clients better, to serve my listeners better. And so yeah, that's one accomplishment I guess I'm proud of.
Oh, good for you, Shay. That's so awesome. I love that. I want to talk a little bit about what groups and activities fill your cup. And how you just talked about like making choices, and there's so many good things to make choices about. When you're living with intention, how do you know that balance between making sure you are filled and having balance in that way?
So, advice that my mentor gave me was to live your life in a way that sets all areas of your soul on fire. So, for me, that looks like, you know, physically being involved on the ranch. It also looks like having a part in the bigger part of the industry, and that's kind of where the podcast fits in the rancher minds, where I'm providing resources and helping ranchers in that sense. I also have this really soft spot for youth. And so I'm a volunteer for it's called the North Dakota Junior Red Angus Association. So we get to host a couple events around the throughout the year. There's two other amazing advisors on there with me and some moms who help out, and we get to host these events to help youth just be involved in the beef industry and supporting industries and help them figure out what they're interested in. Um, and working on, getting involved in church because faith is important to me. And then there's this community bucket where, it's small, but my husband and I play volleyball in the winter. There's a volleyball league. And so Wednesdays we do that. And I think that's just really important to foster that community and build that. And that's more fun than anything, right? But it's important. And so it looks like that. But when there are other opportunities that come up for different boards or leadership positions, because I am on a few smaller ones, but the reason I've said yes to them is because they are smaller commitments on the time side. But it's so, for example, there was an opportunity for me to, help with other youth stuff. Well, I'm already filling that bucket with another organization. I don't have time for both. So one or the other. Because even if I gave up something else and then had two, not all my buckets would be filling, if that kind of makes sense. And it's not perfect all the time, but it's something to shoot for and something to just be cognizant of. I have this on my whiteboard. I have these circles. And so it's like there's the life circle, there's the work circle for the podcast, there's the ranch circle. And I kind of view them as like a gear model and how they're all turning each other and making the whole system work. And so every time I add a new commitment, it gets added to the board. So that way I can always glance over and see exactly how much I'm involved in and remind myself how I need to split my time.
So I love that what you said about your mentor saying it sets all areas of your soul on fire. Is
Mhm.
that right?
Yep.
How do you tap into that? Or what does it feel like to you when when you're in that zone of like, yes, this is meant for me versus this is really good. I'm enjoying it, but it's not fully there.
I think you really have to take time to be honest with yourself. And also, there's a couple ways to do it. So, one exercise I do when I start, maybe feeling moments of burnout or I'm trying to discern, do I need to make a shift or make a change, is I do energy journaling. And so throughout the day, I write down, what all did I do today? And then beside it, I'll put either an up arrow, a down arrow, or an in between arrow. Like when I was doing this, did I feel energized or did I feel low or was I dreading doing it? Or was it somewhere in between? And I'll do that for a week or so and then go back and look at it and figure out like, okay, if these types of activities are draining me, they probably need to go or be delegated. Or if I can't do that, figure out something else to that's going to help shift my energy so that they are more enjoyable, whatever that might look like. Another exercise that I've done before too is If I'm deciding if I want to continue doing a specific part of my business or be on an organization, is I, flip a coin. Heads, yes, I'll do it. Tails is no. Flip it. How does it land? So if it's no, what's my initial gut reaction to hypothetical? It's even though it's hypothetical and it's not a real decision, what's my initial gut reaction to not being involved in that or not doing that anymore? Is there relief with it? Well, then it probably needs to go, maybe not now, but someday. Or something needs to change, right? Or are you pretty like saddened by it? And it's like, well, then maybe, that's a sign to keep going. So those are just a few things to help work through and kind of decide what's right for you.
Wow, those are really yeah, that really does make you think about being honest and really evaluate how we're using our precious time.
Well, and I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier. What are we doing because we're scared of what other people think
Mm.
instead of what we actually like to do and want to do?
Do you feel that that perspective has helped you to be more open when maybe people's perspectives don't necessarily maybe line up with what the expectation is?
I think sometimes, but like I said, I still work through that. Every decision every day is what will people think. So
Mhm.
it's still a challenge. But yeah, I do think it does make an impact.
Have you had family members who maybe felt the pressure of, "Oh, this is the life we live. Look at our family legacy." Have you ever had any family members who kind of struggle and say, "You know what? I don't think this is my journey." Or has it been really easy for them?
I don't, I've never asked that question to my parents or um, sister, I guess. I mean, it's something that I talked about myself and I wasn't sure right away. It was very much a choice for me to come back. My parents never said you have to come back. When my husband and I were just dating, he never said you have to come back. Like it was very much a choice. Um, I do have a friend who actually I know a few people who they went back to their operations and within a few years they decided to leave because they did realize that it wasn't for them. And I
Mm.
think there's a lot of power in that. And that's a really, really hard thing to do. It's a really hard thing to step away from.
I can't even imagine. I just I not even being in their shoes, but just imagining the weight of, w well, what is next and what are the expectations that maybe I've gotten into, and but I love that is fearless when someone is able to commit themselves to something and then be open to, "But now I'm changing directions."
Yeah, it is. I think it's fearless, it's powerful, it's empowering to others to
Yeah.
see that that's always an option.
Yeah, I love what you brought up earlier about how when you see other people living in an intentional way, putting themselves out there and disregarding some of those limiting paradigms that it gives you strength. And I believe that as well. And so I appreciate you and your website and the work you're doing and the daily work, right? Of
Mhm.
continuing to show up in the world in a way that's authentic to you because other people don't have the dream of being a podcaster and
Yeah.
cattle producer. That's not everyone's dream, but it's yours. And so that's where you're meant to be at this time. And I think that that's so amazing.
Well, thank you. And I mean, I just applaud anyone who's even taking steps to live their life on purpose. And I think what you're doing with this podcast is amazing in itself. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, before I let you go, because I've like fully enjoyed this conversation and it's just flown by. But I want to ask you, what are you doing today to live your life on purpose?
I knew this question was coming, but it goes back to staying true to myself, and even when I feel that pressure of what are other people gonna think, listening to my gut and knowing remembering my why for why I started to live my life on purpose in the first place. So, listen to your gut.
Thank you. Thank you, Shay. And we will connect your website to our listeners so that they can look you up and find you and see the really cool, interesting work that you're doing on on a life that's just wonderful.
Well, thank you, and if anyone's listening, and even if you don't have questions about podcasting, but just questions about farming or ranching, send me all the emails, messages, whatever. Happy to talk and share my life within that area and what it's all about if you have questions where your food comes from.
Thank you. Thank you for
Mhm.
being so open and willing to have conversations and make sure that people are enjoying what they're doing, enjoying where their food is coming from, and knowing that that there are stewards of the earth and of the animals who are being very responsible and careful about their lives.
Well,
So,
thank you for allowing me to share my message. It means a lot.
thank you, Shay. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you are ready to live your life with greater purpose and intention, check out my free Power of Vision workshop, where you'll uncover your life dream, eliminate doubt, and move forward toward your goals with confidence. Get instant access with the provided link. Your life is too precious to live just by chance or by default. I want you to live your life on purpose. I will see you next time.